Two of the most famous men of the 20th century were both born around the same time, and they were both named Albert. The one was called Albert Einstein, and the other Albert Schweitzer. Albert Einstein was the great scientist, while Albert Schweitzer was the great humanitarian and medical missionary. Both were extremely well known, and both received the Nobel Prize. They also happened to look somewhat alike, each sporting a strikingly bushy head of white hair. One day, Albert Schweitzer was on a train. Two ladies came up to him and asked, "Do we have the honor of speaking to Professor Einstein?" "Unfortunately not," he said, "but I quite understand your mistake because we both have the same hair." And he ran his fingers through the bush of white hair. "But inside this head it is altogether different. However, we are very old friends, Albert Einstein and I, and if you like, I will give you his autograph." With that, he pulled out a sheet of paper and wrote on it, "Albert Einstein by way of his friend Albert Schweitzer." Those ladies ended up with two very famous names on that piece of paper. How often do we go to someone's close friend to get in touch in a certain way? Just a few years ago, one of the most illustrious people in the world died. That was Otto von Hapsburg, son of the last Habsburg emperor. Shortly before, a French newspaper did an interview with him. It was very interesting because after almost a century of life, this man remembered things that no one else remembered. He remembered the First World War, the burial of Emperor Franz Joseph in 1916, the coronation of his own father, Emperor Karl. So when people wanted to get in touch with that bygone era, wanted to get in touch with the mind and person of the old king, they would go to his son. And it was like that autograph from Dr. Schweitzer. It was like saying the emperor by way of his son. It must have been like that in the days after Jesus' death. People longed to see him, but he was no longer there. So whom did they turn to? The people who had been closest to him. They must have asked so many questions. What was he like? What did he say? They would have spoken to those who had known him, his mother, his apostles, and most especially to that beloved disciple, the one Jesus loved. This one far outlived the others. So even when the others were all dead, people could still go to this dearest of friends who lived almost 100 years. Through him, they could be in touch with the Christ they were seeking. They too would have received something like that note from Dr. Schweitzer. Jesus, by way of his beloved friend. We would all love to see God. We would all love to get in touch with Christ, our King. But it was so long ago that he walked the earth. There is no one left who was around at the time of Jesus. They have been dead for many centuries. How can we see the Christ, the King? We look to the past, to the writings about him, but that's the past. We look to the future, too, to that time in another world, another life, when we shall see him face to face. But that's the future. Henry David Thoreau was once asked what his views were on the other world. He said, "One world at a time." We don't need to look to a future world to meet our King. Nor do we need to look to the past. We can look right here in the present. Where do we see him? We don't see him in his glory. Or do we? If you look up at the beautiful blue sky, you will not find a more magnificent royal robe. If you gaze at the stars at night, if you see the sun rising or setting, you will never find a most glorious crown for a king. We do catch glorious glimpses, traces of our King in our world today. But to see his face, where do we turn? We ask the King, when did we see you? And he tells us, we have been seeing him all along. You saw me hungry and thirsty. Again we asked, when? Look to the cross, he says, and you will see a man there, hungry and thirsty. You saw me naked too. When? We ask. Look to the cross, he says again, and you will see a naked man without any possessions at all. And you have seen me homeless and friendless. You have seen me a stranger in my own land. Look to the cross, and you will see a homeless, friendless stranger abandoned by all. Oh, and you have seen me a prisoner too. Look to the cross, and you will see a prisoner hanging, dying upon that cross. And we can hang our heads and admit, we did not recognize you. And then we can say with all justification, but that happened long ago. We were not there to see your crucifixion. We were not there to see the hungry, thirsty, naked, homeless stranger imprisoned. When did we see you, Lord, in our life? Then he points to his beloved poor, to the suffering of this world, to the crying children, to the starving peoples of the earth, to the peoples ravaged by war, to the peoples going through grief and pain. He points to the homeless people we pass every day. He points to everyone suffering in any way, and he says, there am I. And every time you looked into the face of one of these, you were looking into the face of the King you were seeking. Every time you helped one of these poor, destitute, suffering people, you were helping me. Every time you ignored one of them, you ignored your King. For there am I in their suffering. This is the time of thanksgiving, the time when in this country we become just a little more aware of people in need. Every time we reach out to one of these, it is as though we were receiving that note from Dr. Schweitzer. And the note reads, Jesus the King, by way of my friend, the poor.